So, it's Advent. And as we come into this Advent season, we're going to think what it means that Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. Today, we're thinking that Jesus, God with us, brings hope. Next week, we see that God with us brings love. Week 3, God with us brings joy. And then week 4 reminds us that God with us brings peace. So today, God with us brings hope. I was reading about someone who had been lost at sea. In the summer of 2017, two longtime friends, commercial fishermen, John Aldridge and Anthony Sosinski, we're way on ahead. Back one yet. Hey, there we are, that's them. John and Tony, they set out to fish. They were about 40 miles offshore, and Tony was sleeping below deck while John started everything to get ready for the catch that they were looking to get. And he had come across this handle, and it was stuck, and he was really tugging on the handle, and it broke. And he staggered back over the edge into the sea. The problem was that they had put the boat on autopilot, and it kept going. And so he's in the water, screaming for help, even though he knew there was no way that Tony, who was sleeping, would hear him. And he didn't hear him. So he watched the boat disappear into the distance, and it was gone. He was alone, treading water in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean without a life vest, and thinking that this was his day to die. I don't know if you can imagine what it would feel to be in that kind of place. If there's ever been a hopeless situation, then that has to be it. And in fact, that's why many fishermen never learn to swim. Because they think if they're over the edge, that's it. While John was trying to calm down and work out what on earth he might do to quiet those thoughts of certain and impending death and to stay afloat, he realized that his boots actually kept bringing his feet up to the surface. And he thought, I can use that. And there he is demonstrating. He took his welly off and he plunged it into the sea, and the air in it kept it afloat. So he did it, and he put one under each arm. So he had kind of solved one problem for at least a little time. He could stay afloat. A flicker of hope. He then began to think of his family and the fact that nobody knew that he was missing. He tried to set goals, beginning with just getting through to the morning. 4 hours later, Anthony woke up, realized that John was gone, and called the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard began the search procedures, even although they said they didn't really have any hope of finding him alive. But on the boat, Anthony found the broken handle, and he knew what John must have been doing when he went overboard. And he was able then to work out the depth at which they had been when he was doing that, and was able to kind of work back and give the Coast Guard a sort of better area in which to search. It wasn't great, but it was better than nothing. So John made it alive to the morning, and he tried to keep his hope going, but the hours kept passing, and there was no sign of help. And then he spotted a fishing boy. And he was able to climb on it and at least be out of the water. And that gave him a new surge of hope. And then in less than an hour, a Coast Guard helicopter flew by, spotted him waving frantically and splashing in the water. And they lowered down and got him up into the helicopter to safety. Despite all the odds, he survived. An amazing story. And a story of hope despite the circumstances. If most of us were out there bobbing about in the middle of the ocean, we probably would have given up hope. But hope is like that. It's the whisper that just maybe, something's going to change. Maybe these boots will float if I turn them upside down. Where is the hope in your life? For some, hope is the first candle to be lit when the power goes out in a storm. Hope is the first day that you wake up and can breathe again after an awful cold. Hope is that percentage that you do have of beating cancer. Hope is the faint line on that stick when you've been struggling to get pregnant. It's the first ray of sunshine through your window after a difficult night. Hope is hearing the words, "They're going to be okay." Hope is that flicker of maybe, just maybe. Hope is the fuel of faith and of dreams. And hope is what we celebrate today on this first Sunday of Advent. Advent actually is the season of hope. The word Advent means the coming or arrival, and the season is marked by expectation, by waiting, anticipation, and longing. It's not just an extension of Christmas. It's a season that links the past, the present, and the future. It offers us the opportunity to share in the ancient longing for the coming of the Messiah, to celebrate his birth, and to be alert for his coming again. Advent looks back in celebration at the hope that was fulfilled when Jesus came, while at the same time looking forward with anticipation of the coming of his kingdom when he returns for his people. And so during Advent, we wait for both. It's an active and assured and a hopeful waiting. In a season that, as we know, is often marked by frenzied busyness, Advent is an opportunity to set aside time, to stop, to think, to prepare our hearts and help us place our focus on a story that's bigger than our own. The story of God's redeeming love for the world. It's not a season of pretending or covering over. Actually, it should be a season of digging deep into the reality of what it means that God sent Jesus to be Emmanuel. It's a season of expectation and preparation, an opportunity to align ourselves with God's presence more than the hectic season of presents. So wherever you are on your own spiritual journey, I invite you into this season. It's a time that allows for questions and for struggle as we take time to think about Jesus coming. And it's not a celebration that God comes to fix things, from broken computers to broken families to broken and hurting lives. Rather, simply, Advent is a celebration that God comes at all. He comes to be with us. He is God with us. In the darkness, in the pain, in the chaos. He is Emmanuel, God with us. And that's the way God has been working throughout history. You see, way back in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, he spent time with Adam and Eve, with people in the garden. He spoke to them freely and honestly and openly. We were designed to be there with him and to enjoy that, to experience his presence. The wholeness that comes from that. But you may know the story. Adam and Eve chose to be disobedient. They chose sin. And that separated human beings from God. And the brokenness that we see in our world is the ongoing result of that disobedience and of sin in the world. But I hope you realize that ever since, God has been working towards restoration and healing and wholeness for all of us and for all that he has made. That's the overall story of the Bible. As you read the Bible, we can see God making a way and giving and reminding his people of hope that he's still at work in the world. We see it with God's covenant with Abraham, who was called Abram at that time. In Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3, he says, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. When God encountered Jacob at Bethel, he renewed that promise, that covenant, and reinforced hope that was rooted in his faithfulness. Genesis 28:15, I'll not leave you until I have done what I promised you. But then time passed. Years and years. Generations came and went. Centuries shot past. And we don't do that very well as human beings. We don't like to wait, particularly nowadays when everything is instant, when you can go home and Google kiwi fruit and get an answer. We don't like to wait. And so, over and over again, the Israelites cried out, how long, O Lord? How long? From the times of Abraham and Isaac to Jacob to David, Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the other prophets, there was this repeating history of devotion to God and then turning away from God and judgment. There was prosperity, there was recession, feast and famine, pleasure and pain. The Hebrew people weren't really any different from us. When things got good, they tended to forget about God. And then when things got bad, they shouted for his help. But through it all, there was this deep and ongoing longing that God somehow would fulfill his promise, his covenant, that the Messiah would come. And when he came, he would make everything right. It wasn't just a happy idea that drifted in and out of the Israelites' consciousness and culture. It was a real hope, a real passion. It was their deepest hope, and it sustained them through all the times that they had. The good times and the bad times when they were taken away into Babylon in exile. They still had this passion that God somehow was going to rescue them, that somehow he was going to send Messiah, that somehow everything would be okay. And then in the midst of that long journey, Isaiah, one of the major prophets, simply because he wrote more than the others, he wrote a lot and he taught a lot and he played a really prominent role in Israel. He was very famous in his day. He wasn't always very popular, especially when he was telling the king and the religious people things they didn't want to hear. When he told them God doesn't like the way that you treat poor people. Or when he said an enemy empire is going to invade us and destroy us. I mean, let's be honest, who wants to hear that? But that was his message. But he is the poster boy for Advent. Through Isaiah, God gave Israel lots of prophecies and promises about this Messiah who was coming, the one he would send. And in that way, even in those times, and with the messages that he was to give, Isaiah became a voice of hope. He lived 700 years before Jesus, but he gave these words that still ring with hope for the coming Messiah. Isaiah 7:14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. And then Isaiah 9, 1-2. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. And then a little later in that same chapter, in verses 6 and 7, he says this, for to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Imagine living in those days. You're a good Jewish man or woman, and you've had all of this teaching all of your life that God was in control, that God was going to work, that God was going to make everything right. It was a message of hope and expectation. Did Isaiah understand all that he was proclaiming? I suspect not. He may have got it to some level, and certainly when King Cyrus came from Persia, they thought he was the one because he let them go back to Jerusalem and back to their land, but he wasn't the one. He didn't know God's timeline. He wasn't privy to that. He didn't know when Messiah was going to come. Perhaps he thought it would be in his lifetime, or maybe he was wise enough to know that God's work stretched for generations and generations, but whatever, he was filled, and God's promises fueled him and his people to continue to hope for the Messiah for year after year after year. And as we turn our attention to the Christmas story in Luke's Gospel, there's Zechariah, this old man. He would have known all of these words, all of these prophecies, all of these stories. He was a priest. Luke described him as righteous and blameless. He was a good Jewish boy, a follower of God, and a spiritual leader to his people. And he would have understood, and he would have held that longing for Messiah to come. So imagine when one day, out of the blue, let's say a Tuesday, because what else happens on a Tuesday? It's his turn. He gets chosen by Lot. He's to go into the temple. He's just going about his ordinary, everyday Tuesday business. When God steps into the picture, and God from nowhere just says, here's your hope. It's now. It's right here, right now. It's been 400 years since Israel has had any prophetic voice. There's been nobody during that time speaking anything from God. And here he is, 400 years later, and God begins to speak. 400 years. Just to think about how long 400 years is. 400 years ago, Johannes Kepler was discovering his planetary laws. North America was still to be explored by Europeans. The Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II imposed religious uniformity on all his lands. He said everybody had to be Catholic. And that started the 30 Years' War in Europe. James I of England and the 6th of Scotland was the king. So it's a long time ago. But we kind of get that. You know, that's kind of, we've not experienced it obviously, but we've heard it in history. We understand, we know James. I mean, for goodness sake, he had a Bible written and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it's kind of in there somewhere, somehow. It's not beyond our understanding. So when the angel showed up and said to Zechariah that he would have a son who would go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make a ready people prepared for the Lord. Zechariah knew the significance of what he was being told. And he's told, do you know, this boy that's going to be born, don't let him drink. You know, there were things that were to be restricted in the boy's life. But when you think back in Jewish history, was there anybody else whose parents were told to do that? Actually, there was. There was this guy you might have heard of called Samson. So he's told his son is going to be of the stature and status of Samson and Elijah. These are two pretty big names to be bandying about. Two pretty big characters to be told your child is going to be like that. And so he understood the significance. But he also understood that they were too old. Do you know, they were too old to have children. And it's easy for us to stand all these years later and go, did they not remember Abraham, who was too old? You know, there's loads of people who were too old, and yet hope sprang for them. It's easy to be critical, but in that moment, it just comes out. We're too old. How's it going to happen? It was a really big deal. It was a really big deal in those days. It was shameful, in fact, for a couple not to be able to have children, especially for the woman. Somehow it was looked on as if she had failed. They would have tried and hoped and prayed to God to bless them with children, but it didn't happen for them. Even though they were well thought of, especially Zechariah, he was known as a good priest. The very fact that they were childless would still have been a stigma, an asterisk in people's minds. You know, the kind of, oh, aye, well, you know, Zechariah and Elizabeth, really good people, but well, you know, they never had children, you know. Oh, yeah, aye, that's a real shame. Well, you know, there must be something. So when Zechariah gets this message from the angel, you can understand that he would be in shock. You can understand it and go, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And do the whole, who me? Too old. Don't know what's going to happen there. Well, what happened there was that he was permanently, or at least for a time, literally speechless. Because he said, if you don't believe me, there you go. You're not going to be able to tell anybody. You won't be able to speak until John was born. I'm sure that must have been an inconvenience. But can you imagine the hope that sprang up within him and within his wife Elizabeth and all the people around him when they heard this news? They knew something had happened. They knew that something had happened inside that curtain in the temple. And hope begins to spring. Those old prophecies, actually, they're maybe not that old anymore. Maybe, just maybe, God is on the move. The one prophesied to come in the spirit of Elijah to prepare the way for the Messiah is coming. God is moving to restore hope that he's still here, that he's still coming. God's about to stir things up and change eternity forever. Hope in Israel was alive again. Hope on earth at its deepest level was alive again. And maybe you're thinking, well, that's okay. That's all very nice and great for those people who lived thousands of years ago in another country, thousands of miles away. But what about us? What about me? I mean, they weren't fighting cancer. Their father didn't walk out in them. Their mother wasn't an alcoholic. They didn't lose their job with no warning, with bills to pay and debts stacking up and kids expecting Christmas presents, never mind a Christmas dinner. No matter what. No matter what. No matter what kind of problems, what kind of struggles, issues you are facing right now, no matter what season of darkness and pain you're in, I want to encourage you not ever to abandon hope, because Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us in the darkness, in the chaos, in the issues. How can we know? How do we find that tiny spark of hope when we're on the verge of giving up? Well, I think there are several ways that all of us can kindle and reconnect with God's hope during this Advent season, no matter what we face. And the first thing is that hope has to be based on God's word. Part of God with us is his word, that he left us so that we could understand who he is and how we can relate to him. These are his promises to his people over the years, both long ago and today. They are in some way a piece of him. They are beacons of hope, reminders that can penetrate our hearts and spirit and assure us that no matter what we face, no matter how bleak tomorrow looks, no matter how bad the pain, God will never leave us or forsake us, and nothing can separate us from him. Think of these words in Psalm 139. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. And you feel the hope in those words. God with us means that he'll always be with us, and nothing can take that away. And Scripture is filled with stories and words and promises that can rekindle that supernatural hope within us. As we move through Advent, let me encourage you to dig into the words of the Bible with real expectation that God with us means he will speak to you. Because God is with us, we can hope that we are never alone.